announcements are now being sent out to thousands of our viewers. New thing.
Oh, there we go. I think I ended that before it played. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen and get the timer going.
Okay.
It looked to me like I looked away and looked like I got, oh, that's a good picture. The other picture I had on my screen cut off some of the top of my head.
Mm.
But the three little images all seem like the correct image.
Yeah, that's what the viewers will see now because we're about to start the 10-minute countdown clock, which is the animated version of the Rainbow Yin Yang.
Is he what?
It's animated. You'll see it start to
Oh,
move and
here we go.
Yeah, okay.
And round we go.
Oh, you're talking about the big clock is animated.
the Rainbow Yin Yang is animated.
And the clock technically too. You're
Yeah.
both correct.
Thanks to one of our viewers named Anderson Chadwick from Australia, who saw the Rainbow Yin Yang. And I had an old animated version I did 20 years ago. And on one of our interviews, I mentioned that it could be improved upon. And he took it upon himself to create this new version, which I'm very fond of.
That's handsome. Is my audio okay here?
Yeah, your audio is great, Russell.
I have a big black snowball.
Oh, microphone?
Yeah.
I have one of those too, I think. Yeah, works pretty well. So Russell, you were sharing before we went live here that you have the first iteration of the Rainbow Yin Yang pin. Is that right?
I don't know that I've had this for some time on the sweater. I don't know if it's the first. I
Yeah,
just
I had those made up even before we started the YouTube channel.
Mhm.
Now I have the second iteration and the third iteration on my collar.
Oh, fun. And then I'm bringing up the rear with the third one.
I think yours is the second.
Oh, I have the second. Well, what is the third one? How is that different?
Well, let me hold on. I'll hold it up this close to the camera. Let's see.
There we go.
This is the third one,
Oh, okay. Oh, beautiful.
which is based on Anderson Chadwick's version.
Okay. And I know there's a lot of meaning in here for you, Jeff. And I also really liked, Russell, what you were sharing with us again before we went live or our pre-live part.
a big teaching of Buddhism is the idea of non-duality. That is his compendium, the Prajnaparamita, highest teaching, says specifically that conscious that there is no separation of consciousness. And the big deal today, why would I talk about that today, is that three people just got a Nobel Prize for showing that the world is held together through non-duality. The idea, Schrodinger said the most important part of quantum mechanics is the idea of non-duality. It's the most important part. And three physicists got a Nobel Prize for doing experiments showing that once you have entangled particles, you can bring them far away in the universe and they'll still be entangled. You still grab one, you affect the other one. So the idea of no separation is now part of it's now kosher with physics. The idea of our being connected together, mind to mind, heart to heart, is is permitted, and it's called entanglement. It was first discussed by Schrödinger in 1934, which I can remember because it's my birthday.
Oh, that's helpful. And a synchronicity, perhaps, of your life
Yeah.
path.
Well, the way I see it, the yin yang, it looks like it's a symbol of duality, but actually the yin and the yang each turn into each other.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So we live in a world which appears to be dualistic, but it isn't really.
Now, Ingo Swann, as far as I can tell, invented the idea of remote viewing in our program. As we started our program in 1972, in 74, we published our first paper in uh, Science magazine, which is quite an accomplishment to get an ESP paper in science.
Wasn't it Nature, Russell?
Nature, thank you very much.
Because we reprinted that paper in wrong book. We reprinted it in this book.
Yes, it was in Nature.
Yeah, the entire it's a classic. It is a classic and a very rare thing to get a paper about ESP published in the world's premier science magazine.
That's where we planted our anchor. And then we have a much longer paper in 1976 with Hella's work, where Hella did what Ingo did, only she did it better because she was a control. The Hella's work was significant at 1 in 1 million. Ingo was significant at 1 in 1,000. At 1 in 10,000, but he was first.
Hella Hammond?
Yeah, Hella published was part of a lengthy paper, the Proceedings of the Engineering Society. Did a whole long paper discussing remote viewing and a theory and so forth in the engineering journal. And Hella was in that. And we showed, in a sense, that feedback is not necessary because when you shine a light in my eyes, it changes Hella's EEG alpha component. So her brain is definitely is straight up connected to my brain with his EEG through the EEG, and there's no feedback at all. It's direct perception. So it's all so although in some cases it looks like a remote viewing is of photographic precognition, that can be true in some cases, but it's not true in all cases.
I think the amazing thing about Hella is she was originally brought into your program as a control subject. You thought we need somebody who has no ESP whatsoever to compare with the great psychics like Ingo Swann, and Hella turned out to be even better.
That's right. She was 10 times more significant than Swann.
Wow.
She was a girl for all seasons.
She was a lovely person too. I remember several pleasant evenings with her at your home.
And she was a lovely person, indeed. Skillful, could take her anywhere. My criterion at one point for girlfriends is, could you bring her to the White House? Because I was worried, had several contracts with the government, and I would occasionally have lunch at the White House. So I wanted to know that it's a girl who knows which side of the bread to butter, because sometimes they don't.
I've never heard you talk before about having lunch at the White House, Russell. And we're about to start in just a few seconds. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, host of New Thinking Aloud. I'm with our co-host, Emmy Vadnais,
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
and our special guest for today's live stream, my dear friend, Russell Targ. And I'm so delighted to be with Russell today. Russell is now 91 years old, but to celebrate his 90th birthday, we released this book about 18 months ago. It's still available on Amazon. It contains transcripts of all of my interviews with Russell, about 16 of them, as I recall. So I am delighted that you're still with us. I remember, Russell, you were a little concerned that you might not make it to 90, but you seem to be going strong. So Emmy and I are both really thrilled to be with you today.
Yeah, I've had some medical challenges, but I seem to have overcome them.
It's great.
I'm still here.
You sure are. In fact, you look terrific.
Thank you.
So let's go into a little more detail. You indicated earlier that you wanted to start by talking about Taoism, one of the, I think the way you couched it, one of the first scientific descriptions of consciousness.
Well, my understanding is that our conversation today was about remote viewing. Was that right?
Well,
You wanted to talk about remote viewing today?
we will talk about remote viewing and consciousness and anything else that pops into your mind.
Well, my idea is that as an old man, I could start with old science. The first discussion we have of anything like remote viewing was the Taoist teaching of yin yang, which is the pin I have on my sweater, and you may also have a pin like that, which you popularized, the yin yang pin, which the Taoists taught 500 years before Christ is a symbol for non-separation in consciousness. So the Taoists were the first people to really articulate the idea that consciousness of human beings are entangled one with the other. And then the Buddhists describe that in the Prajnaparamita, in the published writings of Buddha. They say explicitly there is no separation in consciousness, and that's a hard doctrine in Buddhism, no separation. And we went on to do experiments in that direction at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, starting 1972. 1972, I gave up my laser work and decided that I wanted to follow my heart's desire, which was investigating psychic abilities. And I was able, with help, put off to start a program at SRI. I had an invitation to give a lecture at NASA in 1972, and I did that still with the idea that I wanted to get out of laser stuff, which is what NASA knew me for, and see if NASA would support a ESP program. They're a pretty radical idea in 72. But I went to the conference with my ESP teaching machine, to the little device that gives you feedback. It looks something like this.
People
They're
can download this for free, I understand, from
not anymore.
not anymore. It's
They gave them 10 years of freebies.
now it's available at a price. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they're available for $1 now.
Oh,
Oh,
And there's another similar one, which we don't need to go into. This is 4 squares. The other one is 4 different architectural sites. And it was an experiment to see whether people would do better trying to describe whether their target was a particular architectural site or a particular colored square. And I was surprised to find out they do better with the squares because they get attached to they get attached to the sites. That is, different sites are appealing to different people, and they just love that corral, or they love that beach scene, or they love some other scene, and it interferes with their psychic ability. Their passion for the picture interferes with their ability to see it psychically, and that
hmm.
was quite surprising. That's not. I went to a lot of work to collect 400 pictures that be chosen randomly on the screen, and that didn't work. It extinguished the remote viewing. I thought that was interesting. But I brought this game to my meeting at NASA at St. Simon's Island. I met Werner von Braun there and told him that I was interested in getting support from NASA, and I had this ESP teaching machine. And in my mind, I told him, with a machine like this, you could teach people to get in touch with their psychic abilities so that they could tell psychically if there was going to be an accident or a malfunction with a spacecraft, as he had with Apollo 13. They almost lost the spacecraft. And he said, I'm very familiar with that accident, with the failure of an oxygen tank, which they could have known about but didn't. But they were able to scotch tape it together. Apollo 13 was a near collapse, near failure. And von Braun loved the ESP game, scored very, very high, and drew a crowd because it rings a bell whenever you get the right target. So everyone came over to see what von Braun was doing. And then von Braun took me to meet the manager, the top administrator of NASA, Jim Fletcher, and said, Russell's been making lasers for us now for a number of years. He now wants to teach astronauts to have rapport with the spacecraft. What do you think of that? And Fletcher said to von Braun, well, what do you think of it? You know, and he said, I think that's a good idea. Because I didn't know at the time, but I learned that von Braun was a closet psychic, used to do psychic things with his grandmother. As many top people have, everybody's got a psychic grandmother. But von Braun was a big ally of us, and von Braun arranged a meeting. And as I was talking to Fletcher, along comes Edgar Mitchell, who's now working for SRI. And Edgar Mitchell coincidentally said, well, I can arrange a meeting with you and Russell and the president of SRI, and we can meet in his office next week. And I can tell him that you're going to give him some money. And we met with uh, president of SRI, whose name escapes me right now. But we all got together and agreed to start a program. I went off to Iceland to watch my brother-in-law, who's a chess player. I watched him become world chess champion, this Bobby Fischer. And when I came back, I worked with Hal Puthoff, another laser scientist, and we started a program at SRI 1972. And there are many coincidences, but the idea, um, in science fiction, the idea, nothing has to be true, it just has to sound true. So if I could convince von Braun that we could teach people to have rapport with the spacecraft, if that didn't sound crazy to him, then we had a program. And that went forward for 10 years at SRI.
And another 10 years after that.
Yeah, so I've been teaching remote viewing for 50 years now. Remote, I just say in a word, what's remote? Remote viewing is an ability that we all have to a greater or lesser degree to look into the future, to look into the distance, and that ability into the future is not limited by the amount of time, and the distance, and the remote viewing into the distance is not limited by the amount of distance. For example, the famous psychic functioning by Annie Besant, one of the founders of Theosophy, is she was asked by the inventor of Theosophy, uh, who is that? Who do we give credit?
Madame
Adam
Blavatsky,
Blavatsky asked Annie Besant to look into a block of paraffin and tell her what a hydrogen atom looks like. Blavatsky is a brilliant woman in addition to being psychic. She said, scientists have now created a scientific periodic table of the elements. I think we should create a psychic periodic table of the elements.
Hmm.
And I want to start with hydrogen. And Annie Besant looked into this block of paraffin and drew up a pair of nesting triangles. And she said, this is what holds the atom together. And her drawing is essentially congruent with the initial drawing by Murray Gilman of what a quark would look like. So Annie Besant, sitting in her studio in India, peering into a block of paraffin, made a drawing essentially exactly like what Gilman's first drawing for quarks. So she invented quarks 50 years before Murray Gilman by direct psychic perception of what the quark looks like in the block of paraffin.
That's remarkable.
So there's no limitation. And one day, our contract monitor for the ESP teaching machine, contract monitor from NASA, came to visit me, wanted to know how that's working. And I said, we're writing up a paper. People can learn to improve their ability. And he said, well, as long as Ingo's here, could Ingo look into the future? We're sending a second spacecraft to Jupiter, and continue, Ingo tell us, are we going to, in the future, are we going to find anything interesting that we didn't know about? And Ingo said, yeah, I can do that. Give me a pad of paper. And he made a drawing of Jupiter with a huge single ring around it and said, you'll find that ring. And the contract monitor, Art Reed, said, well, aren't you thinking of Saturn? Ingo said, I've been looking at the solar system my entire life. You have to believe I know the difference between Jupiter and Saturn. When you get to Jupiter, have them take a picture for me so I can see the ring around ring around Jupiter that's right there to be plainly seen by a psychic eye.
and
And
it's invisible normally from the Earth.
yes, and you might have Ingo's drawing in your files.
As a matter of fact, I bet I can find it, Russell.
And Ingo drew that just standing there with a cigar in one hand and a clipboard in the other hand. And he said, there you go, I'm looking at Jupiter right now. and he was able to draw that picture. Jupiter is 500 light minutes away. That is, if Ingo was perceiving at the speed of light, it would take him 500 minutes to see what that looks like. But it in fact took him no time at all to see what it looks like. So it looked like, in a certain sense, there was no separation between Ingo's awareness and Jupiter. Or there you go. So we say Jupiter is 500 million miles away, and as far as Ingo is concerned, there's no distance at all. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, and it really was a surprise to the scientists. Before Ingo Swann, they had no conception that there would be a ring around Jupiter.
That's right. And it took him no time to do what excites me is he open the window, looked out and said, "Oh, there's Jupiter has got a ring around it." If the thing is 500 million miles away, you'd think it would take him a little time to see that. To and took him no time at all. So that's the actual drawing that he made on the spot. So your remote viewing ability is not limited by distance or by time. And Ingo Swann, during this period, wrote a book called Psychic Sexuality, where he felt that your consciousness has the capability of profound interaction with other people at a distance. That is, your consciousness is part of your synchronistic interaction with the universe. So if you're able to make contact with a cooperating, friendly adult, you can have as profound an interaction with that adult as you would like to. And what he talks about in his book, it, a new made up word, telesthesia. It's not telepathy, not mind to mind. It's heart to heart connection, which Ingo calls telesthesia. And Aleister Crowley, who's known to many of us, was an early magician, was interested in sex, drugs, and ESP on the astral plane. He wrote this whole big biography about things to do on the astral plane. So it's a remote viewing is not a guessing game like card guessing. It's a manifestation of your ability to spread your consciousness throughout space and time. Is there any part of remote viewing that you could comment on, Jeffrey?
Well, of course, I had my first remote viewing experience with you, Russell, in 1976 at SRI, and it was a remarkable one. But we have a question here from a viewer whose YouTube name is Fossil and Mineral Expeditions, and he's referring to something else that occurred during my visit with you in 1976 because that's when you introduced me to all of your files about Ted Owens, the PK Man. And this viewer asks, how would you classify Ted Owens' ability to do weather manipulation? What what would be the purpose of such an ability? And maybe you can describe what occurred on that occasion.
Well, at that time, Ted Owens was eager for us to have him come to SRI and show off his psychic prowess, but we were on super good behavior to have this psychic program in a classified domain at SRI. So we're very concerned that we didn't know what the hell Ted Owens would do. We knew that he was a huge self-promoter and he may have some significant psychic abilities, but the game wasn't worth a candle. It's like we had Uri Geller with us for several weeks, and that was a big problem also. So you got these guys with great ability and huge ego, and you don't know whether they're going to let rabbits loose in the hallway or what's going to happen. But their goals were different than ours, so I was not eager to risk the program for this unknown psychic guy who wanted to come and show us how he could. Because we had somebody at SRI who could already damage equipment by looking at the chart recorder. A, a Dutch psychic, well-known Dutch psychic, was able to affect the chart recorder in the same way that Uri Geller could. Is that the event you're talking about, Jeffrey?
Well, as I remember, there was a drought going on, and Ted Owens promised you he could end the drought, and which
Well,
happened within a few days.
what I remember him promising us is he could bring us a snowfall. This was April, close to my birthday. And he said, I can bring you the snowfall this weekend. And I said, okay, I'll look out for the papers. And he said, well, you'll see it in the headline. And indeed, within 2 days, Palo Alto had an extremely unusual snowfall, which came in at the beginning of April. I know because it was my birthday. And
Yeah.
we were quite impressed. And I made the great mistake of insulting him,
Mm.
insulting Owens. I say, that was really a remarkable, accurately forecast you have of the rain, of the snow is going to come in. That I didn't forecast anything. I made that snowstorm for you. So my experience with Ted Owens was very positive. He just certainly demonstrated his psychic prowess without any doubt.
And that's when you asked me if I wouldn't mind taking over the study, and you were happy to turn over all your files on him.
That's right. I can get rid of my files and give them to Jeffrey Mishlove.
And you did 10 years of study with him, Jeff, and now a film is being made
And now we're working on a documentary finally, yeah, after 50 years.
with
Can you tell us about the film?
yeah, tell us about the film.
Well, as a matter of fact, Russell, I'm working with the same person, Lance Mungia, who you worked with to create Third Eye Spies.
He's a very talented producer and director, remarkably capable man. So I look forward to see and artistic as well.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that you're working with him. It should
We
be.
have several previews up available on the New Thinking Aloud channel on YouTube.
I'll be eager to see that.
Well, we hope to have the project finished before the year is out.
Russell, what do you think makes a good or excellent remote viewer, given what you started out with the yin yang saying that there's unity, non-duality, everything is interconnected, consciousness is not separate, we're all essentially connected to each other. Why are some people maybe more talented, and what makes someone perform so well, do you think? Because I think a lot of people, probably even watching this program today, want to be better with their psychic, intuitive, remote viewing skills.
I would say it's a very complicated question
Yeah.
because I've had people come into my laboratory, numerous people come into the laboratory, government officials, Undersecretary of Defense, um, had an Israeli psychic brought in to make sure we're not cheating. And we've had these people who are quite skeptical and quite negative, and I'm able to jolly them into a position where they do something psychic. Well, one example with a Israeli physicist, Yakin Aronov, the very well-known physicist from Israel, is brought in by my laboratory director as a kind of fair witness. I know that Yakin doesn't believe in this stuff. Maybe you could show him something, change his mind. And with that, lab director Bob Elliott and Hal Puthoff went to hide somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area. Had no idea where they had gone. And I was sitting in my little office with Yakin. We could talk. We were friendly on the outset because we're both physicists. And he knew I had built a powerful laser and was well known in the laser regime as having actually done something scientific. So we at the outset we're friends. And I said, well, Hal and the lab director are going to hide somewhere. Can you close your eyes and tell me what comes to view? He says, no. And I close my eyes. It's dark. Isn't it dark when you close your eyes? And I said, well, we can see what develops. And for 20 minutes, nothing developed. And I said, well, they're gone 20 minutes now. They're going to come back in 10 minutes now. I know it's dark when you close your eyes. Let's pretend we're doing therapy. And here's a piece of paper. I'm asking you to free associate. I'm not asking you to tell me about images or anything. Just imagine that something comes to view. Can you just tell me what comes to view? He says, well, I see some ducks. My mother has a duck farm in Israel, and I just see a row of ducks all in a row. I said, well, can you draw a duck? He said, of course I can draw a duck. So he drew me two ducks in a row, and that was that. And 10 minutes later, Hal came back with the lab director. They said, well, what have we got? What did Yakin see? He said all he saw was these ducks that reminded him of his mother's farm. He said, that's amazing because we went to the duck pond in Palo Alto, and the targets they chose are always chosen from a big pool of 60 targets, and they're chosen with no replacement randomly. So no, I did not know anything about a duck pond in Palo Alto as a target, but Joaquin came up for some reason with ducks on the day that they went to the duck pond.
Mm.
I don't know whether that convinced him of anything, but it convinced the lab director, who was very impressed with the fact that we handed him a duck to go with his photograph of the duck pond. And so when you say, well, who is psychic? Well, Aronov came in, and he would say, I don't believe in this stuff at all. It's dark when I close my eyes. I have no feeling for sympathy, empathy with this at all. So he was sort of a not extreme non-believer, but I was able to jolly him along and turn this task from being impossible into something that he could imagine. I could break it into small enough pieces so he could do it, and he wound up doing it excellently. And I had a similar experience with the American Undersecretary of Defense, who wanted to see something psychic. What he had in mind is that he wanted Ingo Swann to do something psychic for him. And I said, well, if Ingo does something psychic for you, describes where your major has gone to hide, you're going to think it's some kind of trick, that it was not chosen randomly, there was some other problem. but I'm going to ask you to do it. Your major is going to hide somewhere with hell put off. I have no idea where they are. I know you don't believe in this. And just tell me about the surprising images that come to view. And he said, well, I see this circular tower made of bricks and some tables, and they had gone to something called Allied Arts, which is a cafe and art museum 10 miles north of SRI in Menlo Park. And he made a very good drawing of the whole cafe and the brick fountain. And he took his drawing and his major's photograph back to Washington and renewed our program for another year. So that's basically what I did for a living. That I had this little seance room set up where non-believers would come in and then they would turn out excellent looking remote viewings of distant places. So I had very, very few people who couldn't do it or who did it incorrectly. All of which is a super long answer to your question, uh,
Oh.
who has psychic ability?
Mhm.
And the answer is at SRI in my laboratory, almost everybody has psychic ability. So that makes it, from my point of view, SRI is really quite easy to do because I, in a controlled experiment where I don't know what the targets are or what they could be,
Mhm.
if I sit down with somebody, they seem to do excellently. And at that point, I had not done any remote viewings at all. I was asked the researchers were asked not to get involved in doing experiments because you don't want to contaminate a good-looking experiment with a scientist sticking his muddy feet into the experiment. You want it to all the researchers should just be doing research and the psychics will do their own thing as best they could. But we were really prohibited from taking part in the experiments to keep them clean. You don't want this to be part undersecretary and part Russell contributing drawings. Toward the end of the program, we had done many remote viewings with Pat Price, who turned out to be a prodigiously successful remote viewing practitioner. He could even look into a NSA listening post on the East Coast of America, top secret listening post, and he was able to describe the facility, just given its coordinates, and then go inside and find some cards that indicate in a filing cabinet that indicated the true name of the site and things that they were looking at. And that was very successful from the point of view of Kit Green, who gave us the target. Kit Green was our CIA contrast monitor, but the NSA was furious. Why would the CIA target a psychic on this totally secret Sugar Grove facility looking at Russian communications? Here, the CIA is inviting us to violate the security of the place. So we had a meeting at SRI with very angry NSA people and CIA people and the police trying to find out what we're doing, why Kit Green was sending us psychically to look at the uh, NSA site. And Kit Green said, well, I didn't send you there. I just gave you the coordinates of my friend's log cabin, which is over the hill from Sugar Grove. And then they turned to Pat Price and said, well, if you were given the coordinates of a log cabin why did you describe this top secret military facility? And uh, Pat Price now famously said, well, in the psychic realm, the more attention you have on hiding something, the more it shines like a beacon.
Hmm.
So when I went into the coordinates that you gave me, I could see the log cabin, but who cares about a log cabin where I have this huge military facility all locked up with security, and I could penetrate that. I thought that would be much more interesting for you than a log cabin on a hillside. So that's why I described it. And that's what life was at SRI. You never know what you're going to be looking into.
And this might be a good time to bring up the example when Pat Price failed to show up and you did become a remote viewing subject.
Yes, toward the end of the period is 1954. Price of the last year, 1974, is the fourth year of the program. The CIA hired Pat Price away from us. He said, we can't do business with this guy who can look into anybody's office, read what's on the table. We had already done that at SRI, read the document on the table trick. And CIA was terrified that friendly guy with his pipe in Palo Alto, could focus his attention on your desk at the CIA and read the documents that are there. More than admiring him, he frightened them. So the CIA operations people, including Kit Green and Ken Kress, hired Pat Price. Hired is not strong enough.
Stole him away from you.
Dragooned him from his company office in Palo Alto and made him into a farmer in West Virginia. So the next time we saw Pat Price, he was in his overalls, shoveling hay in the barn. But by daytime, he was doing remote viewing for the CIA because he was they felt he was just simply too dangerous to have floating around by himself, because he was sort of a Superman, and you don't know what he's going to look into. Unfortunately, he died a few months after that.
Mm.
And what we learned was that in addition to his remote viewing for the CIA, he was also passing on all of his psychic abilities, all of his psychic remote viewing, passing them on to the Scientologists organization in California, into the Celebrity Center. So he was like a double agent. He was spying for the CIA and passing on all of his documents to the Scientologists, who was nobody's friend at that time. And the CIA was very upset about that. And then he died. So we have no idea who would kill Pat Price. Top of the list, of course, is the Russians, we knew. Pat Price already appeared in classified documents from the Soviet Union, who were aware that he had this prodigious ability. So the Russians were on top of the list of who would kill Pat Price. He might have died from a heart attack, because he was known to have a weak heart, whatever that means. Because I've had a weak heart now for 50 years, and it doesn't seem to slow me down greatly. Or he might have been killed by the CIA, who was worried that they have Superman working for them, but they have no control over him. He can see anything at all. So Pat Rice definitely died shortly after joining the CIA, and it's a mystery as to why he died.
I know the film Third Eye Spies begins, as I recall, with you visiting his grave at the cemetery.
That's right. I mean, Price was a good friend of ours. He's really a friend of Hal's and mine, and a friend of the program. We greatly appreciated him and was aware of his superlative abilities. So we were very disappointed when the CIA stole him away to his farm in Virginia.
You know. Do you want to talk about the time when Hal Puthoff was on vacation? And if I recall correctly, Pat Price was to come into your laboratory to try and describe where Hal was hiding.
We were doing a series of experiments, a rare vacation for Hal or for me. Hal was invited to go to South America with some friends who were traveling there and would take him along. And I would do a remote viewing with Pat Price, who would stay with me, and each day describe where Hal was hiding. And we had no feedback for that. So, for example, on day one, they might say, he's at a harbor, or is it a church, or is it a cathedral, or is it a market? And then on day five, Price didn't show up. And it turned out that on day five, the CIA had come to get him and had already shepherded. I thought I was in the middle of an experiment, and CIA had already shepherded him off to Washington. So I'm sitting in my little screen covered phone booth, a screen room, uh, where I would do experiments with Price. So I had an empty chair and a screen and a phone and nobody there. So I had already put into the tape recorder the remote viewing with Russ Targ and Pat Price, but it appears that Pat Price isn't going to be here today, so I'll have to do it myself. So I'm going to try and describe where Hal is somewhere in South America. We've had no feedback at all regarding other places he might be or where he was. So I just sat there and closed my eyes and visualized where Hal could be in South America. And I had Price's initial descriptions of ocean, beaches, churches, markets, sort of South American kinds of things. Didn't influence. I just closed my eyes, and what appeared to me was a airport on an island. So I what I saw is something like what we show in the upper picture there, to the diagonal airport with sand and grass on the left, sand and grass on the right, and an airport building on the left. And I made one picture in about 5 minutes, and my picture is just on the bottom there. And you notice what I drew greatly resembles what I got for feedback 2 weeks later. So it looked to me like after the whole experiment was over, it looked to me like I closed my eyes and somehow was able to visualize in great detail what that airport looked like. And I had, of course, no idea. Oh, I don't even have experience with a so-called island airport, but I drew the airport and I said there's ocean at the end of the runway, sand and gravel on the right, airport building on the left. And it turned out that that was uh, one of the most accurate pictures that anybody ever turned in for a remote viewing of a distant location. So the reason I'm showing this here is that I want to be able to communicate that remote viewing is so easy that even a scientist can do it. Is there anything further about that nice drawing?
Well,
Well,
it's a wonderful.
I could say earlier in my life, uh, as I mean, the background is I've been doing laser work very successfully for a decade, but my life interest was in psychic abilities, and I had done magic on the stage, some of it genuine psychic stuff, some of it magic trickery, and I was pretty skillful at the trickery part and moderately still skillful at the psychic part. So when I was willing to mortgage my career as a laser scientist, I was pretty convinced that there was high quality psychic abilities available, and I might be able to do that successfully, helping people get in touch. So I had in my life, I had come out earlier with tableau like that airport building of other things as a whole detailed picture of a indoor scene with odds and ends. So I was pleased with the result, but I wasn't blown away.
What about the room that you used there at SRI? You were part of the radio physics laboratory, as I recall, and the room in which the experiments were done was completely shielded from radio waves or other electromagnetic transmission. Don't you think that might have had an impact on the enormous success you had there?
Well, the things I was doing with Uri in that period, things I was doing with Pat Price in that period, was in fact in a shielded room. But most of the things that we did were in the top floor of the radio physics building. It was not not a shielded room. It was an ordinary laboratory. Uh, we we had access to the shielded room because we were doing experiments with Uri Geller, and I knew that Geller's mentor, Andrea Puharich, had already built a tiny hearing aid that could go into a tooth. And I knew that because I had seen it. I'd visited him in his lab in downtown New York. So I knew that Geller had available to him all sorts of odd electronics from Andrei Puharich. And I wanted to make sure that we were in a clean environment where it was not possible for a person on the outside to send messages to Uri Geller. So that's why we were in a shielded room. We're in the we're sort of a shielded telephone booth is what it looked like. Did not really pertain to Pat Price, which where we would be hiding out to say separate Uri Geller from Andrei Puharich.
Mm.
So I don't think you need a shielded room to do remote viewing. That is, I did a whole series of experiments with a psychic who was supposed to look into the future each Friday, and we would give him uh, a target to see. Because we're forecasting change in the silver commodity market, and we wanted to see whether the market was going to go up a lot, up a little, down a lot, down a little. So there were four possibilities, and we would make an association, or the broker would make an association with each of those conditions. So he would have four objects in his office for our experiment, maybe a coffee pot, a flower jar, a Bible, and a hammer. Those are his four objects. And he would randomly assign those, meaning up a lot, up a little, down a lot, down a little. So I would then, Monday morning, I would interview Keith Harari, who's an experienced psychic. I say, here we are, Keith. Uh, the broker is going to choose one of these four objects corresponding to up a little, up a lot, down a little, down a lot. And on Friday, when you come back to my house, I will hand you an object. So the object is not presently chosen, but by Friday, the broker will have chosen an object depending on what the market does. At this interview, I would not have told him. I would, of course, not told him what the four objects are, because we always try very hard not to make any guessing game. I say, the broker is going to choose four objects from around his office, and depending on what the market does, I will show you something Friday when you come back. And Keith's task was on that Monday, as we're sitting in my coffee table, describe right now what we're going to be handing you Friday when you come back. Does that make sense? We call it associated remote viewing. And we did 9 trials like that each week for 9 weeks. Keith would come to my house on Monday, says, I think you're going to show me a champagne bottle on Friday. Then on Friday, he would come back and I would call my broker and say, well, what happened today in the market? He said, oh, the market went down a lot, but the target was a champagne bottle for the down a lot. And a champagne bottle was chosen by the market. And I said, well, that's good news because that's what the psychic shows. So we did 9 trials like that, and Harari was correct in all 9 of those. So he made $250,000 forecasting the silver market. And what's important about that is that Harari did not get any feedback except the object that we gave him at the end of the trial. That his feedback was not tied to the objects that beyond what we showed him at the end of the game.
You didn't realize that whether you were winning or losing money each week.
Well, we knew each week what the outcome would be. That is, if Harari said, I see a champagne bottle, the broker would say, that's what we had today. The market we were forecasting the market goes down a lot. That corresponds as I sold silver based on the fact that your guy saw a champagne bottle.
So he was aware of the money. In fact, as I recall, he said, I began to feel like the goose that laid the golden egg.
That's right. That's because there was major money involved, and that made him nervous. And we were on this unsuccessful the following trial when we tried to do that. One of the reasons we're unsuccessful is that the investor wanted to do things twice a week rather than once a week. If you do it twice a week, it meant that the viewer did not get feedback for trial 1 until after he had done trial 2. This whole experiment is driven by his feedback. That the only thing the viewer ever got to see is what's the correct answer when you put in his hand. Basically, the targeting instruction is, here we are, Keith, on Monday. On Friday, I'm going to put something in your hand. Tell me right now what are you experiencing with regard to what I'm going to put in your hand on Friday? So he would quiet his mind, look forward to Friday. So this is entirely a precognition experiment. It's entirely a precognition experiment because at the time of the viewing, there was no target. That makes sense? So the viewer's whole task is Russell's going to hand me something on Friday. Can I visualize what that is? And the answer is yes, he could.
In other words, precognition.
The whole thing was driven by precognition. The future was the only source for that data. See, in my drawing of Hal hiding at San Andreas Airport, there's some confusion on my part, on other people also. I made a drawing of where Hal was at that time, and my task is where is Hal going to be at noon on Friday? That's all I knew, and he's someplace in South America. It could be in a jungle, it could be anywhere. And as the airport came to view, so I just said, I see this island airport and I'm drawing a picture. And my only feedback was the picture that they gave me 2 weeks later. Now they couldn't if I drew a picture of an island airport, they couldn't bring me a picture of a jungle, or they could, but they couldn't uh, pretend that I had the right answer. They were pinned to photograph where Hal actually was that day, and it turned out where they were that day was the airport that I drew. So, but because my drawing so greatly copies that photograph, uh, there's a strong likelihood that my mental processes were driven by the photograph more than uh, the actual site. It doesn't make it any easier, did not make it any easier that what I was looking at was my feedback picture, but it complicates things in that if you're doing a remote viewing, you would like to feel that your attention is on the distant thing that you're looking at. But in this instance, it looks like my attention was on the feedback that I would get 2 weeks later.
It's amazing. We have many questions coming in for you, Russell. I don't know, 30, 50, maybe more. I don't know how many. We just have about 30 minutes left. There's a question here from Robert Farah who asks, how do you tell the difference between imagination, memory recall versus new information from remote viewing?
There would only be experience. An interviewer can help you with that, but by questioning about what you see. But after you do a few remote viewings, you begin to be able to tell what your viewing is driven by, whether it's something in your past or something in your future. That would be you, it's separating the psychic signal from the mental noise is what you're questioning about. How do you signal? How do you tell the psychic signal from the mental noise? And you have to do that only through practice.
And then when a person has an experience of having a hit or an accurate understanding of a event or a location, that then they can build that confidence and have the discernment for
That's
subsequent
right.
times.
That after your first trial, you now have some experience. What does remote viewing look like?
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at your viewer says, "Tell me about this." See, my job is to ask the viewer, "Tell me what you're experiencing. Tell me what you're experiencing with regard to a new view." No, I would say, what what images appear to you right now? What are the surprising images that come to view? And he then has to answer my question with what surprising images come to view, and that limits to some extent what he can't tell me about last night's baseball game, can't tell me about his garden. I'm looking for something as a surprise. What appears in your awareness is that's a surprise that doesn't make any sense. So I don't know the answer. I never know the answer,
Mm-hmm.
but I know what the answer sounds like.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And
But
there's an intention connected to the focus.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
But my job is to help him separate the psychic signal from the mental noise. I
Mm-hmm.
once did a remote viewing experiment with Jeffrey, and we were all set up. Hal went to hide someplace, and I'm sitting with Jeffrey in my office. And Jeffrey said, "Well, it looks to me like Macy's department store." And I said, "Well, it could be Macy's, but that doesn't sound like remote viewing. Let's take a pass on Macy's right now and tell me what you're experiencing that makes you say Macy's." So Jeffrey then drew a bunch of hangers on a coat hanger, hangers stretched out into the horizon, and where Hal had been hiding was a pedestrian overpass across Bayshore Freeway. And what you see in the photograph is this whole stretch of wires crossing the highway.
Yes.
So I was answering the question, what can the interviewer do to be helpful? And the answer is, even though I don't know the answer, I know that the viewer's job is to look for something surprising in his mental experience.
Yeah, and how you're describing working with your remote viewers, that you obviously you were working with world-class people who had a probably
No,
a well, some were new, and then some of them have very natural ability, and you also had a positive expectation and confidence in them, which do you think that aided their success?
definitely. That I have confidence in everybody's ability,
Yeah.
whether they hate ESP or whether they're a famous viewer. I treat all of them as though they have the potential for turning on the remote viewing switch, because almost all the people who show up in my lab, as with Jeffrey, they may come in and say, "Well, I close my eyes and I see a P-38 airplane." And I say, "Well, let's take a break now. What do you experience? What are you experiencing that makes you say that? What comes to you? Tell me about that." And we can then get his experience separated from the name of the thing that he just gave me. So my job, although see, I never know the answer, but I know what remote viewing sounds like.
You were just describing the remote viewing that I did with you. Is that right, Russell?
Yes,
Oh, because I can share
Yeah, the
the
picture, the
I
drawing,
have
right?
I have those images. I'll just share my
And last
desktop.
time you shared, Jeff, the
I know it showed the
pictures.
whole
Okay.
screen,
Okay, good. I just want to make
but
sure.
here, this is the actual photograph of the highway overpass from two different angles. These are the drawings I actually made. But when I made this drawing, which is almost photographic of the highway overpass, in my mind, I jumped to interpret it intellectually and said, oh, it's a rack of clothes hanging in Macy's.
And you went directly to Macy's.
Yeah.
So my job, even though I knew it could be Macy's department store, but saying it's Macy's doesn't sound like remote viewing. I want to know what's the image that caused you to say that, and
Mhm.
then you gave us the right answer.
Yeah, fascinating example of analytical overlay.
So Jeff chose not to become a
And
professional remote viewer.
it shows the very important part that a uh, interviewer plays in these things, whereas again and again the viewer has a job of separating the psychic signal from the mental noise.
And shows your abilities, Jeff, and you chose to champion parapsychology versus being a professional remote viewer.
Well, I for a while I was actually teaching workshops in remote viewing with a lot of success, but
Mhm.
uh, it was early on in those days. I remember the Society for Training and Development had a conference, and I proposed to them a workshop on training remote viewing, and I got kind of laughed out of the place. They didn't want to have anything to do with it, and I figured I better work on other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought in my career. That I knew in my heart that I wanted to work in psychic abilities. Remote viewing wasn't invented yet, but I knew that I wanted to work in ESP. And from going to many conferences in New York, I could see that the people working in ESP were really quite nice folks, but they were all poor. And I grew up in the 1940s, and I did not want to experience that in my life. I wanted to actually have money available, and I knew to have money available, I could be a physicist. That would work. That would work. And then after maybe 15 years of doing physics, I then had enough credentials. People knew who I was, so I could trade in my physics credentials and go to the CIA or go to NASA and say, I've done stuff for you in the past. Here's what I want to do now. And that strategy worked.
Yeah. Well, we are grateful for what you have done, Russell, and of course, on behalf of the viewers and listeners, also, Jeff, what you have and are doing. So I know many people are commenting, by the way, that they're even honored to be able to pose a question to you and that they're very happy to be here. Jeff, do you have a question that you see you want to ask Russell from one of the audience members?
Here's a question from one of our regular viewers, Andrei Slavash Krasowski, who asks Russell, did you ever speak about parapsychology with your brother-in-law, Bobby Fischer? If so, what was his opinion about it?
Well, Fisher was often accused of being psychic, that they were concerned that I contaminated him because of my interest in ESP. So the Russians once took apart the whole table because they felt that there was some psychic intervention going on. I don't believe that I had a amiable relationship with Bobby, but I don't think that we talked about ESP. 'Cause I didn't want to do anything that is he was on his road to becoming the world champion, and I had no desire to challenge him in that road. And I could have asked him, well, do you think that there's some psychic stuff? Because I knew what he was doing. He was an expert. His father was a mathematician who was an expert in visual imaging and visual memory. So the fact that Bobby was able to memorize hundreds of games was hugely to his advantage. It's as though he had the computer chip in his head already. So that, I knew that he was a lot of people, no, very few people had made the connection between his genetics and his father's abilities, and that's right. So I figured that Bobby, at this point, I was had the idea Bobby was on his way to become a world champion. I had no idea, no desire to probe that.
Isn't it the case, though, that later in his career, when you learned about the famous chess match organized by Wolfgang Eisenbeis in Switzerland between a deceased chess master and Victor Korchnoi, who was at the time a living grandmaster, you shared the moves of that game with Bobby?
Yes, I did that, and Bobby said that it's a real chess game, and the dead guy made good moves. It looked like a real chess game, even though even though let's see, I don't Korchnoi was playing. I can't remember how it was set up now.
There,
This,
there was a medium doing automatic
that's right.
writing.
The medium was in touch with the deceased. That's why it was hard to remember
Yeah.
who's playing the white pieces, and the answer is the medium was playing the white pieces, and Korchnoi was playing the black pieces, and the medium, who was a non-chess player, who knew how the pieces moved, but that was very strong evidence for me. There's other people had looked at that and considered it. I think if I sent you a write up, it would be including a chess playing physician who spent a lot of time analyzing those two games.
Our mutual friend Vernon Neppy, who has been
That's
on the New Thinking Loud channel many times. But did you explain to Bobby that the white moves were ostensibly being dictated to the medium by Geza Maraxi, who had died in 1952?
Yes, they did.
Did he offer any thoughts about that?
He was pretty hurt. He said it looks like a real game with genuine moves being made by the people. He sort of he didn't take aboard the geophys geopolitical implications.
Hmm.
He, he, he I said, does this look like I asked him, does this look like a real chess game? And he says, yes, both people are making appropriate moves.
Okay.
And that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Here's a question from a viewer whose YouTube name I think is Ab or AB, and they say you are an inspiration. Do you feel this is kind of a three-parter, but they all go together. Do you feel the average person can learn remote viewing, and can they learn it without spending lots of money on classes? And can you also provide some real-world, non-military uses of remote viewing?
Well, they could definitely learn it without spending lots of money. The remote viewing is so easy to learn that it's really a scam to charge lots of money to help people learn remote viewing. But basically, any book that sort of to me, gives you tells you how to move the pieces.
Mhm.
There's how to do the remote viewing will get you started. Having an interviewer work with you is very helpful, and you've got to find that person. And you can use remote viewing for lots of things. There's there was a period where people would call me and help me and ask me to help them find something. And a favorite example where I had given a lecture at the home of a noetics uh, angel who they gave Noetics money, and I gave a lecture at her house. The next day, this woman called me up and said, "I got a terrible problem. Thank you for the nice lecture. Happy to meet you. But I've lost my tennis bracelet, and my husband's going to kill me if I can't find it. Can you help me?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what a tennis bracelet is." He said, "Well, it's a slim bracelet covered with diamonds, goes around my wrist. Very valuable." And I said, "Well, I, in this situation, I remember vividly, as I turned my swivel chair away from the keyboard and was looking at a map of the world. And I said, well, in your house, do you have a couple of 4x4 posts sunk in the grass somewhere?" And I had only been in the main um, dining room or home. I never visited anything else. And she said, "Well, in the backyard, by the back steps, there are two 4x4s on either side of the steps, so you don't roll a car or a wagon down the steps." I said, "Well, I think your bracelet's by those posts. Well, go and look." And she went and she came back and said, "Oh, thank you so much. It was right where you said it was." She didn't say, "How can I help you? How can I thank you?" She just expressed her gratitude and said goodbye. But that was the kind of remote viewing that I do. I just close my eyes and visualize usually a complete scene. I mean, even today I can close my eyes and see the 4x4 posts of the graphs on either side that I saw 20 years ago. So remote viewing is very valuable. Can avoid car accidents, look into the future, avoid all sorts of accidents, find lost things. There's no shortage of things you can do.
Well, that's a great example. People want to be able to find missing objects, and there's a person here whose name is D.E. Saccone or Saccone. They ask, must it always be an image?
Well, in remote viewing, basically is dealing with images.
Mhm.
Um, it depends. What else do you have in mind?
Could be
You,
dowsing.
Location or like hearing maybe or smelling or feeling.
well, the feedback part would be interesting. Let's say you're dowsing. You got a big field. Where should I dig to find the oil? Where should I dig to find the water? People certainly. There's no doubt that people do that successfully. I mean, dowsing is a respected profession as people go out in the field with their little fork stick and will charge you major money to find out where they should dig. So you can your question of can you use dowsing, can you use remote viewing to do dowsing? The answer is people do it all the time. Uh, Probably dowsing would be probably the principal use for dowsing today. The other way, principal use for remote viewing today would be dowsing,
Hmm.
because that's there's dowsing is basically what do I do when I'm looking for something and don't know where to find it? That's the dowsing question.
Here's a question, Russell, from a viewer named Greta Lockwood, who asks about do you meditate and do you use meditation to enhance ESP?
It's a great question.
I am no longer a regular meditator. I had been, I was enthusiastic meditator for many years, but I have not done so for, I would say, the last decade. Uh, it's essential to find a way to turn off the noise. So there's no doubt that getting a meditative practice is very helpful to do remote viewing because you have to find the off switch if you're going to do remote viewing. So the general answer is you have to be able to turn off the mental noise. Now, whether you do that through a meditation practice or how long should you do that, um, I don't know. But the answer basically is yes. If you are not meditating now, this is a good time to start.
Mm. Yeah, and there's also health benefits that go with meditation, just for an added bonus. There's a question from Happy Day who asks, is feedback essential in remote viewing?
No, that's a good question. Feedback is not essential, and I'm glad to get that question. For example, uh, Pat Price once described. I have to have two cases with Pat Price. He once described a crane in the in a weapons factory so Semipalatinsk in the Soviet Union. There you go, as if by magic. Yep. Yeah, Price drew that crane for which he did get feedback, but then they said, "Well, that's terrific. We'll renew your program." This was a top secret Soviet weapons factory in Semipalatinsk, and the CIA contract man said, "Well, what are they doing there? What's going on? Why do they have that crane there?" And Price, I went with Price back up to our little shielded room, and Price said, "Well, they're building a giant steel sphere, which they're making out of gores, which is sort of apple slices. They're welding it together, and they're having a hard time welding it because the thing's so thick. But I can draw you a picture." And he drew a picture of this sphere being welded together, and then Price died. And 2 years later, they rolled out this big sphere, and Aviation Week published pictures of it, and the pictures they published greatly resemble what Price drew, including all the gores all the way around the sphere. And Price, of course, was no longer with us, but the feedback that I got very greatly resemble what he gave us as his response to the question, what are they doing? What are they doing there? And he was able to give a extremely accurate picture of that with no feedback at all. And I'm sitting here looking at pictures on my wall. The very first remote viewing that we did in the program, 19 whenever we started the program, 1972, one of the very first trials, I was sitting with Pat Price, who I knew only slightly, and Kit Green and Hal went to hide someplace, and I had no idea where they went. And Price said, "Well, it looks to me like a water purification plant. I see a square body of water about 60 by 80, There you go. He drew this 60 by 80 body of water and a round body of water about 80 feet in diameter. And then he said that there's two tanks, which he showed at the upper right. And that's what I got. And on this day in 1972, first ever remote viewing at SRI or with Pat or anybody else. And eventually the city published a picture of what things looked like when 100 years before this was 100-year anniversary of Palo Alto, and the two water tanks that Pat Price drew were in fact right where he showed them. Now this picture is 100 years old, but the water tanks are no longer there. But if you go back to Price's drawing, you can see that these water tanks had gone away in my lifetime, so they hadn't been there for 50 years. But if you show his drawing, you can see that the water tanks were right where he had them. If you can get that picture back.
So let's see. Yeah.
That's great. So you see in the upper right, price of the
Hmm.
two water tanks and hit them in just the correct places, but they're not there anymore. So needless to say, this Price died a couple of years after he did this drawing. So and I didn't get to see this until probably 10 years after we did this drawing. So the answer is uh, Price does not feedback. Price does not require feedback to get the answer. Good question. Does my answer make sense, Jeffrey?
Well, of course, it's a case of retrocognition. He was looking into the past, it would seem.
That's right.
He saw something that wasn't actually there at the time, right? That it was,
That's right.
yeah, which is truly remarkable. We just have a few minutes left.
Well,
So it's not a question of he's not looking at his feedback. He's looking at what had been there.
I wonder why. Of course, maybe as he said earlier, those towers sort of were attractive to his mind.
Mm.
Something sexy about them. Well, we're almost out of time, and I would like to once again just remind our viewers that we do have a book available on Amazon that includes 16 of the interviews that we've done with you over the course of your career, covering a lot of remote viewing experiments, but also covering some of your explorations into the mind-body relationship and into the relationship between parapsychology and spirituality, which is a topic I know is dear to your heart that we didn't focus on so much today.
The question, what does parapsychology have to do with stage magic? And both
That
of
was
and
one
both
of
of
our
both
best
of them are
interviews.
both of them have been similar. That is my job as a interviewer is very much what my job as a magician on stage is. That I'm trying to get the person that I'm working with to experience the world the way I want them to experience it. That is, if I'm, for example, do I have 5 minutes?
We can take the time, Russell, of course.
For example, I have a favorite card trick, which I did all my life and have never been caught out at, even when I was quite young doing it. Was the trick that looks like shuffle the cards, cut the deck, take a card anywhere you like, and look at that card and put it away. And that's what we call the effect. That's what the observer experiences. As it happens, that's not at all what happened. The trick has some sleight of hand, some story to go with it, and you basically create a new reality for the person who is observing this trick, because what you in slow motion, a person watching the thing in slow motion would say, can't he tell that you're just handing him the card? And the answer is no, he can't tell that. He thinks he's freely chosen a card. But there's a famous it's called the magician's force. You get your person sitting across the table from you to sort of go into your view of the world, and his view of the world ends with your handing him the card, but he doesn't realize that. So in a way, that's what I do in remote viewing. Except they don't know the answer. I get him to quiet his mind and describe what he's seeing, draw a picture of that, tell me about it. And it had come to my mind that that's very much like what I do when I'm forcing a card. I try and set the stage for you to do what I want you to do. Is that interesting?
You have a rare gift, Russell.
Yeah, you do.
I mean, I probably spent 10 years as an amateur magician doing stuff on the stage, fooling people. I mean, many kids do magic on the stage because it's so much fun to fool adults.
But we've been talking about real magic today.
That's
There's a
right.
versus stage magic. Yeah.
That's what I graduated from stage magic to real magic.
Yeah. Well, you've been a big inspiration to me and a big inspiration, I think, to the New Thinking Aloud audience as well, Russell. I'm delighted that we had this time with you today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm always very happy to chat with you, Jeffrey.
Hmm. Beautiful. And I just want to give a message to everybody that we are sponsored by the California Institute for Human Science and to check out their website, CIHS.org, if they want to learn more about maybe even studying or having a career in parapsychology. There's now a
CIHS.edu.
EDU, excuse me. Thank you, Jeff. EDU. I don't want to send people the wrong place.
Yeah.
Correction. Yes, beautiful.
Yeah, I'm teaching the introduction to parapsychology class there right now. So it's a very exciting, brand new program. And we want to make sure our viewers know that for those of you who might want to have a career in this field, a good stepping stone would be to get your master's degree or your doctoral degree from CIHS.
.edu. Thank you both. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us because you are the reason that we are here.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you.
Okay. And here.